Hi there. My name is Dr. Peter Rich. I'm a professor of instructional psychology and technology at Brigham Young University. I teach courses on how to teach pre-service teachers how to code, and I've taught after-school clubs for children how to learn how to code from K through 12, primarily in K6. This is going to be the 2023-24 school year data debrief for Hillside Elementary School. So let me go over the data. There's a couple of different things that we looked at as we were able to collect data for Hillside this year. So first of all, and I apologize. When I say Hillside, I mean Hillside Public Schools, not Hillside Elementary School. So this is for the district. We collect data both at the beginning of the professional development that BootUp does, as well as the last professional development. Teachers have time during the professional development to complete a survey. The initial survey asks questions about their beliefs about teaching coding, their confidence for teaching coding, and the post-survey asks those same questions in addition to questions about the practices that they engaged in throughout the year to teach kids coding and to find out a little bit more about what their experience was like. In Hillside, we were also able to collect data from some of the students, some of the teachers, and some of the schools. They gave some surveys to students both pre and post, and so we were able to collect some of that data, and I'll be able to talk about some of that. So just understanding a little bit to get started with who our teachers were. I had 47 teachers complete the pre-assessment and 41 teachers complete the post-assessment. And you can see their experience teaching. Overall, you're looking at over a dozen years teaching experience. So on average, you're looking at mid-career teachers or, about average time teaching in terms of looking at their overall teaching experience. And most of that time has been spent teaching the same grade. You can see that both beginning and the end of year. There's not a lot of experience having taught coding to begin with as well. So you can see even though they're veteran teachers, they're all very new to coding. A little bit more about the demographics of who those teachers are. The majority of these are classroom teachers. You do have a couple of district instructional coaches, as well as technology, computers, and English language learner teachers. The majority of these teachers are definitely classroom teachers that teach. They're generalists and they teach all subjects to their students. So let's start off looking at what the teacher experience was like and listening to the teachers. We just asked this question, what their confidence was like to teach coding both before BootUp and after BootUp. And you can see here that each teacher responding on the same line. So the teacher on the left, that's them saying the same, that is the same teacher as the one on the right as you pair these up. So with their very top teacher here, you say, this teacher said they were unsure due to their lack of technological experience, and now they're a bit more comfortable and flexible. The teachers saying not very confident, now they have more of an understanding. They found coding frustrating, confusing, and now still a little bit of frustration, but more comfortable. Scared, hesitant, and anxious became excited and confident. And you kind of see this as we go along. There's some teachers that didn't know about coding at all, and you see they're feeling a little bit more sure about their coding, that like they can do it. There's those that had a little bit of knowledge and they felt comfortable, but now they feel more comfortable, right? So you see here this next page of teachers. Was fearful, now I have more confidence. Still need some more practice. So teachers are recognizing this is a beginning. There's still more to do. Going from intimidated to seeing the benefit of this and excited. Going from neutral to positive, didn't care for it, to interested. So overall, the theme that I'm seeing across most of these teachers is that they increased both in their excitement, their interest, and in their confidence for coding throughout the course of the year. Never interested in computer science. Still not interested in computer science, just not meant for my brain. So there are some teachers in here who feel like this still isn't for me, right? The majority, though, are going from this wasn't possible to, okay, this is more applicable. In terms of like what their experience was throughout the year, how often they taught coding, you can see that the majority of these teachers, actually it's about an even split as we look at this here, are teaching at least weekly. And for me, that's the cutoff that I'm often looking for to see if their confidence begins to grow. But you can see here we had 20 teachers that are teaching at least weekly, and then 20 teachers that are teaching less than weekly. So this may explain some of the confidence that we're seeing, where teachers are saying they still need some more practice. It's likely those that are saying that are the ones that aren't getting at least the weekly coding practice in their classroom. So you're looking at about a 50-50 split here, exactly from the teachers who responded to this question. We also looked at how often teachers are integrating coding with other subjects. And so the gray is the mean, right? What we normally think of as the average. If we just take all of the teachers' answers and say in language arts, how many language arts lessons did you teach with coding, how many social science, and so on. By far, science was the most common lesson and language arts was the second most, but you've got it across all subjects. I also look and take the median here because the median tells me, kind of like median household income, the median might be a truer or more representative average across the whole population, where some people, if they are technology teachers, they might be integrating coding a lot more often than others, and so that pulls up the mean. So if you look across everybody with the median, you can see that everybody on average here did at least a science lesson and a language arts lesson, integrating that with coding. This is a question that we were asked to kind of find out how well supported teachers feel that they are. And so we ask how well supported they feel across different populations. I'll be honest, these numbers are pretty low to me. Really surprised to see the average here below 5 for most of these. Obviously, they feel the most supported by BootUp and by their peers. But even that 6.3 is a little bit low in terms of how well they feel supported. I'm typically looking for a 7 and above for indication of how teachers feeling well supported. So this is kind of medium well supported, not great by BootUp and their other teachers, but it then drops to the instructional coach and really drops to low with how well supported teachers feel by their principal and the district. This is me without knowing, just saying by the numbers here. So there may be more to this than what I understand here. It's really interesting to see how low teachers feel supported by students' families in terms of teaching coding. So this may be something overall that you want to look at in terms of the community surrounding the teachers to help them feel more supported as they engage in this new activity of teaching coding. I asked teachers what their successes were and what their challenges were in open-ended questions, just like you saw with the before and after. And then I went through and I categorized those for different themes that I might have seen. And so on the successes, you can see the most common successes that teacher mentioned were things about students' abilities and student interest. Those are things like students really like coding. They get excited when we go to code. Student ability has to do with students' cognitive ability and skill with coding. Now students can do things they couldn't before. They're achieving in ways they couldn't before. So those are the major things where teachers are really focusing on student ability and interest. And then you do have, a smattering of other things in terms of their successes. Teacher implementation is just teachers saying, I did it, right? I was able to do this in the classroom. And so that's where teachers felt like they were successful. There was a handful of teachers who also said they didn't feel like they had any successes. A lot of those were teachers who said that they hadn't yet taught coding. So those are the ones that were going to be on that left side of the graph of how frequently they're teaching coding that I showed you earlier. Also looking at their challenges, far and away, the number one challenge here is their own ability, right? So teachers still see that their major challenge for teaching coding is their knowledge and their lack of understanding of coding, and that is where they feel the least comfortable. It is of note that the second most common challenge was none. These are teachers saying, I don't actually think I've seen any challenge, or they indicated that there was none specifically. So, and then a common challenge with teachers when implementing something new is time. There's a handful of teachers who felt like they just didn't have the time to do this in the classroom. So, but far and away, biggest challenge is their own confidence in their ability to code and to debug code, help students learn to code. So getting at the pre-post, where we asked teachers their confidence to teach coding and their beliefs about coding. This is a scale that we've validated with thousands of teachers, and it is there's about 33 items on this scale where we ask teachers questions and we ask them to agree with those questions. 1 is a strongly disagree, 2 is a disagree, 3 is a somewhat disagree, and then 4, 5, and 6 is the positive side of that. Somewhat agree, and strongly agree. So value questions have to do with things like, I think all children should learn how to code. I think all kids can learn how to code. I think my students will need to learn to code for their future jobs or education. And you can see here, teachers started off kind of halfway between that somewhat agree and agree, right? So they weren't necessarily in the strongly agreeing category about how important this was to begin with, but they were positive about it. And you can see there was some growth on that throughout the year. It's minimal, but they're getting closer to agreeing to those types of statements. The CT questions get at things about teachers' own confidence and self-efficacy for computational thinking without having to think about coding. So these are things like, I'm good at problem solving. I can break down large problems into smaller problems. I can see patterns in data. And they only somewhat agreed to begin with that they were able to do these things. By the end of the year, teachers are now starting to get up into that halfway between somewhat agree and agree. So they're growing in that. It's not a huge growth, but it's sort of a small effect as you look at that overall. Where we see a lot of change is where teachers went from their confidence to teach coding. So initially, teachers were on the negative side of that in terms of teaching coding. So they were more in between the somewhat disagree and disagree category of their ability to code. And now we're seeing them at the somewhat agree category. So there's still a lot of room for growth. As we look at this, they've now crept into the positive side of that, but they're starting to feel like they can code. I would want to be able to see them by the end of a second year, if they're teaching this every week, getting close to the 5, where they agree that they can understand some of the fundamental concepts of coding. And teaching coding is not necessarily specific to coding themselves, but it's how well they can teach coding in the classroom. So whether or not they know what resources they can use and turn to for coding, how to help students debug their code, how to foster the types of productive conversations between students. You can see, again, teachers actually started off on the somewhat disagree side of this. They didn't feel confident to begin with. And we see a huge jump there where teachers are now beyond the somewhat agree and moving into the agree category. Again, there's still lots of room for growth here. I'd love to see teachers getting closer to the 5 category after 2 years of doing this. And so that's something I would look at coming into the next year, is whether or not they continue to grow in their confidence to teach coding. That's likely only to happen with the teachers that are teaching coding at least weekly. We also ask a couple of questions just about teachers' attitudes, right? What is their confidence on a scale of 1 to 10 to teach coding? I think this is a really good scale for showing how much that confidence has grown. They started off really low, and that makes sense with just over a year of coding experience on average across the whole group. They had really low coding experience to begin with, and so they were about a 3 out of 10 on their confidence scale, which was pretty low to begin with. And they've jumped up to 6.21, right? So you're looking at more than 100% growth in their confidence to teach coding, which is great. Their excitement, they were on the positive side of excitement to begin with, and that has increased to almost a full point in terms of looking at their excitement, which is great. And the anxiety was kind of in the middle to begin with, so that's not actually much anxiety in terms of saying if their anxiety is a 5 out of 10. It's not like any type of anxiety that's going to stop them from doing anything. And it kind of stayed at that mid-level where it's not a lot of anxiety, but there is some there in terms of thinking about coding and teaching coding. So another area that we looked at then is what was their experience like with BootUp, right? With the professional development itself, what's the feedback that teachers might give on that? On average, the teachers in Hillside Public Schools indicated that they attended about half of their trainings in person and half of those trainings online. So we got to see those kind of split half and half. As one of the things that we look at as well, as BootUp has partnered with Amazon Future Engineer program. Amazon Future Engineer asks these next 4 questions so that they can compare the different programs that they support. And one of those questions is, what is the teacher's satisfaction with their BootUp experience, right? And anything above a 4 is good. That's what we're looking for. Things above a 4, and teachers rated that as a 4.3 out of 5. So that's a fairly good experience that they had with BootUp. How likely they were to recommend BootUp to a peer, that's about 7.5 out of 10. So again, on the positive side, maybe there's room for some growth there in terms of could it have been overall better, perhaps, but they are on the positive area. Like I had mentioned, we're looking for things above a 7 as we're looking at those 1 to 10 scales. And then how satisfied did they think their students were with BootUp? We can see both of these questions about teachers projecting what their students felt and whether or not they feel like they belong. Both of those are above a 4 as well. So overall, the BootUp experience looks to have been positive as they look at that experience. This is exciting. Thank you to the teachers who collected data from their students. I know that's always a difficult thing, especially to do that both pre and post. So I'm going to show you some data. There's 2 different measures that we use. The one is called the Elementary Student Coding Attitude Survey. That's an affective survey that gets a student's attitudes. Again, Likert type questions on that same 1 to 6 scale. There's 23 questions. It only takes students on average 5 to 10 minutes to complete, usually. And then the computational thinking test, that takes about a half hour for students to complete. And this is a cognitive test that looks at students' computational thinking abilities in several different aspects. There are 28 questions and they're in tetrads, so the questions are kind of grouped in 4, where each group of 4 questions are all centered around a specific problem, and then you move on to another group of 4 questions. It's the most used test around the world to measure students' computational thinking ability, especially in elementary and middle school, and I've used it a lot with students in this age range. The max score they could possibly get on that is a 28, but the average for 3rd grade is like a 9 or a 10. For 4th is 10 to 11, and 5th tends to be 11 to 12. So they're not maxing out those scores typically in these upper elementary grades. Yeah, that's something that you don't see them maxing out the score until they get into the high school grades. So what do we see from this? Well, we saw 3 schools, and I'm seeing, it says 3 schools on there, and I'm only seeing 2. So I'm going to look over to my other screen and look at my SGAS data for Hillside Public Schools. And I'm seeing, if I look on the pre-data for analysis by district, Hillside Public Schools, I am just seeing the 2. So I think I just wrote the wrong number there. I'm seeing Deanna G. Taylor and Hurden Looker elementary schools for the schools that administered the SGAS at the beginning of the school year. And you can see that's split pretty evenly between boys and girls, and those are pretty much all 7th graders, right? On average, they took a lot longer to complete this than normally I would see the SGAS taking, but they were able to complete that. And this is the racial breakdown. You see there's the majority here are Black or African American students, and you have a fair number of Hispanic students as we look across the students who completed the SGAS. So we also look at students' prior coding experience, and they answered those questions. You can see, by and large, coding was not something that students had experience with. There were a handful of students who had a bit of experience. How often they code, this is similar to the other one. They're just not coding pretty much ever. But again, there's a handful of students who indicated at the beginning of the year that they had actually been coding. So their attitudes in terms of like pre and post, there were about, not all of these students completed both the pre and the post, but I was able to match up students using the IDs that they provided for pre and post, and able to look at both the pre-mean and the post-mean. And you can see the attitudes that we measure. There's 6 core attitudes: confidence in coding, their interest in coding, the utility value that students see in coding, their perceptions of coders, their math confidence, which we found to correlate to students' attitudes for coding, as well as the social value. And this is what students think their peers and parents think about coding. And you can see here, of all of these, the changes that we saw from pre to post, the only one that we see a statistically significant difference was the social value. So there was a jump from the beginning of the year to the end of the year where students actually felt that there's a much more positive attitude from their parents and their peers towards coding than they felt at the beginning of the year. Some of these other things got close. Probably the closest was their math confidence, interestingly enough, but this is not enough to be statistically significant. And this is sort of a graphical representation of that change that you see. Everything started mostly on the positive side and remained there, so not as much room for growth to begin with, but we do see slight room, and really the only statistically significant growth we saw with a medium effect size was students' social value that they saw their parents and peers ascribe to coding. So I dug into the data a little bit more with the pre and the post, and I wanted to just get the data just from the students who were in both the pre and the post. And I found 37 students that had the data for the pre and the post. And I ran some of these tests again to see if their growth was statistically significant. And I actually did find that their confidence for those that I had both the pre and the post data also grew statistically significantly. And in a pretty good way too. You can see here on the left hand side their confidence was started at a 4.2 and they ended at a 4.585. So again, now they were kind of at the somewhat agree, and now they're halfway between somewhat agree and agree on their questions of confidence for coding. And then we saw the same thing with social influence over here. It was still statistically significant. None of these other areas, you can see every area they grew, but the statistically significant growth tended to be just in the confidence and the social influence categories. And these are the paired samples. So again, this is comparing the students for whom we had both the pre and the post data. So on the CTT side of things, I did have 3 schools on the CTT side of things, and this is Deanna G. Taylor Academy, Hurden Looker, and Ola Edwards. I actually had a lot more students start the CTT to Ola Edwards, but they didn't finish it, nor did they spend at least 6 minutes on it. And so when I look at some of these numbers, you'll say those numbers don't all add up. This boys and these girls number here is pretty evenly split. These are boys and girls that completed the entire CTT and that spent at least 6 minutes on it. Sometimes I have students blow through it really fast in under 6 minutes, and it's really unlikely. I've talked with the CTT creators about finishing it in under 6 minutes, and they just find that really unlikely if they're taking it seriously. And so I wanted to make sure that I had good data and was looking just at students who finished the assessment and who spent at least a minimum of 6 minutes on that, right? These are all third graders. On average, it took them about 24 minutes to complete. And so if we look at their scores here, their average completion time, again, was 24 minutes. The mean score was about an 8.5. So like I said, you don't expect super high scores with their graders on this, but it does scale well. They go up by scores go up by about a point every year. They're kind of in that beginning range of 8.5, where I would expect to see third graders. Maybe a little bit low. Sometimes I do expect third graders to be in the 9 to 10 range, but this isn't too far outside of that range. And you don't see a difference between boys and girls. I ran the numbers on these to see if there's any statistically significant difference between boys and girls, and I found none. So you can kind of see about 3/4 or maybe 70% of the students actually finished who had started the CTT as we look at that. There's 2 questions on the CTT that ask students to guess the score that they got as well. And this is always interesting to look at how good students are at guessing their score. And we find that what happens is in the lower grades, they guess higher scores than in the higher grades. In other words, as students get older, they're better at guessing a score that's close to the score they actually get correct. It's also of interest to me, this always happens, boys overguess their score more than girls overguess their score. So boys tend to be more confident than girls do in their score as they look at this. So again, looking at the paired sample, I had 38 students for whom I could match up their pre-assessment to their post-assessment. And I was curious to see if there was a statistically significant difference. You can see the pre-test mean was about an 8.5 and the post-test was a 9.763 for this group of students. That's a 1.2 point gain, which usually for me does result in a significant difference from pre to post. This time it did not, and that mostly has to do with the standard deviation and probably the smaller sample size. Probably because there's a pretty wide standard deviation here, so that means that there was more variance in the scores. Some of them scored much higher, some of them scored much lower, so that didn't end up being a statistically significant increase, although it was close. Had this gone down to a 0.05, that would have been in the category of thinking is statistically significant. But as it stands right now, those scores are, statistically speaking, probably the same in the post as were the pre, even though it is an increase over a point. They got one question more right on average at the end than they did at the beginning. So that's kind of everything that I see from Hillside Public Schools this year. So lots of good stuff in here. The teachers appear to have enjoyed their training. They've increased in their confidence, at least doubled their confidence to code. There's still a lot of room for growth, and students have increased in their confidence to learn to code, and they've increased in their perception of what their peers and their parents think of coding as well. There is room for them to still grow in their computational thinking. They did grow, but not enough so that we could call that a statistically significant difference. If they continue to do this over another year, I would hope to see more growth. So hopefully that is useful to you as you look at this and you digest this data. Please let me know if you have any questions, and thank you for letting me engage with this work.